Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss continuous diagnostic and mitigation, aka CDM, with government and industry leaders. With me on today's show are Kevin Cox, CDM Program Manager with CISA, James Saunders, Chief Information Security Officer at SBA, Gary Stevens, Executive Director, Information Security Policy and Strategy at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Jim Richburg, Field Chief Information Security Officer at Fortinet, Egan Rinderer, Federal Chief Technology Officer and Global VP of Technology at Tanium, and David Ray, Chief Technology Officer, Micro Focus Government Solutions. Well, you know, depending on who you talk to, they'll say, you know, all that matters is knowing what's on the network, and ID management is the most important thing. Data is the new oil, and we need to encrypt it. If you're not zero trust, you're not secure. All these things matter. And what's been interesting is to watch all of these capabilities be accounted for in this program that has evolved called CDM. Well, let's start with you, Kevin Cox. You are the CDM program manager. You've been doing it for some time. Give us a top line, you know, where does the program stand at this point? A lot of different activity going on. You've been instrumental in making some key decisions about how things get implemented, how they get acquired over the last couple of years. What's the state of the state?
So with our new acquisition strategy in place, Defend, we have the vehicles to keep everything moving forward and to fill any remaining gaps, as you mentioned, with understanding what's on the network and who's on the network. The key thing for us as we head into FY21 is two things, two related things. Number one, getting the new dashboard in place. We awarded that new dashboard contract last May. It really opens everything up for us from a scalability and performance standpoint, and really the value to the agencies is increased 10 to 100-fold. The other related piece is the data quality management, making sure that the data coming up from the sensors is being reported accurately, being reported in a timely fashion. So those two things together in FY21 really will show the promise of CDM, what we've set out to do here in terms of getting the agencies the visibility, getting federal leadership visibility to understand what the agency and federal terrain looks like from a cybersecurity perspective.
Really does show the evolution of the program, right? It's not just, hey, we're collecting this data, right? We've been instrumenting it for some time. We've got a lot of capability out there. It's now about displaying it accurately, displaying it thoroughly, and making sure the quality of the data is fantastic. So James, let's throw it over to you. You've done a lot of work over there at SBA. You know, you guys have really been the agency that's been looked at to sort of suss out a lot of these capabilities and then implement them and sort of pressure test them. And you certainly got pressure tested recently in regards to the activity that's been going on over the last few months. So give us sort of the state of where you all are right now with this program.
Absolutely. No, first and foremost, I really want to give a shout out to Kevin Cox and our Defend portfolio manager, Kelly Dixon, for working with us rebels, what I like to call us at SBA. I know we like to kick the tires and do things a teeny bit differently from that perspective. And to the team at SBA, we're willing to take a risk and slightly deviate from what's in technical environments 1 and 2 to great effect to really provide the value that we need internally and hopefully for the rest of the federal government. Now, with that said, SBA by no means has a monopoly on cloud-based security tools, but in context of the CARES Act implementation, PPP, as well as our COVID-19 response, leveraging some of these cloud-native technologies, integrating it with some of the future state activities around the CDM, particularly the Elastic Stack, that really helps sharpen our respective saw so that when it was crunch time, when we're seeing actors, coming against our network, trying to, impact SBA's mission during the height of the COVID crisis, we were ready, we were there, we were able to respond in seconds and minutes versus days and hours where we were a couple years ago. So that was a huge benefit to us, and I really credit our work around CDM for that.
Really a benefit of having a lot of this instrument in place, having it be what we'll call soft technologies, if you will, and being able to turn it on, scale it very quickly to address the needs of your agency, which happen very rapidly, as you can imagine. Gary, how about at VA? Talk about scale. You all are doing scale at epic proportions over there, using these tools and techniques. And if I recall, you guys were very much an early adopter of the concept of CDM, if you will. Where are you all now on your journey there?
Well, first, I'd like to echo what James just stated. Kevin Cox, Dan DeRubo, they have been phenomenal people to work with. DHS has been there shoulder to shoulder with us, and it has been a phenomenal experience since inception in 2013 when I started. I think at the time it was Mark Niedinger who was leading the charge at that time.
Right.
And just to kind of put it in kind of context as well. So CDM has really evolved and matured since 2013. And that has been essential because as the Secretary's mandate for us and his priority is all about customer service. Well, customer service at a size and scale of the VA is enormous. We got 19.6 million veterans, 400,000 employees. We're the largest healthcare provider in the country and 56 regional data centers. I mean, this size and scale is enormous. I think at some points we are at 7.5 petabytes of data traversing the VA WAN. So CDM has been essential to our ability to gain visibility into what's happening within the environment. And I'd say that, you know, in conjunction with working with DHS and their contractor, I mean, we've really addressed it from a series of layers, almost looking at it from tools and sensors going up to the integration and then ultimately up to the agency dashboard. And within each one of those buckets, we've been able to really look holistically across the CDM portfolio with Forescale, BigFix, Splunk, and how they integrate, not only integrate as CDM tools, but also integrate holistically with everything else that we already have in place. I think when we first started, we looked at it as CDM as this panacea by itself. The reality is that it's not. It has to be part of an integrated approach, which is really our overarching ISCM strategy. And by evolving and moving towards that direction, we've really created this massive ecosystem that is helping drive forward change. And at this particular point, with one of the massive accomplishments that we made is that we've got about 95% visibility into all of our devices. We're confident. We're seeing everything on the within the environment. We've actually moved our CAP score as well that we typically report. And it's been fantastic. So the state of the state is great. Protecting veteran data as secure as it can possibly be and managing the environment, that's really what CDM's allowed us to do.
I'll tell you, it warms my heart to hear that. I'm sure every veteran out there loves to hear that as well, that you've really taken this beast and be able to pull all this data in and now sort of looking at it at a higher order again, up the value chain and really, you know, realizing the promise of what CDN actually is. Jim, how about over at Fortinet? You all have been in the ecosystem for quite some time, very much involved in this complex environment, multi-cloud environment we have now. Tell us, where do you fit into this environment and what's going on over at Fortinet?
Good afternoon, Luke. I'd like to build on the comments of my colleagues on this panel because I have seen this as a former federal executive grow out of something the federal government has been dealing with for a long time. I'm probably not the only one on this call who remembers the CNCI, the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative. The predicate for that was common operating picture of the health of federal networks and the ability to respond at machine speed. That is CDM by another name. So the federal government has been dealing with this for a long time. What I didn't fully appreciate when I retired from government at the end of 2018 was the extent to which the private sector, companies like Fortinet, have actually solved the underlying technical problems of the visibility and the control. The approach has been independently validated through third-party testing, and it comes from multiple vendor families. But the devil's in the details. The practical problem is implementing this in the context of federal budgets and procurement cycles. In other words, we know how to do this on a greenfield basis. The challenge is doing this in the real world on brownfield incremental upgrades within the federal government.
Yeah, and that implementation is so clutch, right? And those decisions that were made a few years ago, learning from, you know, the first round about how things got bought and implemented and flexing and realizing that, okay, we need to make some adjustments, I think has really been the key to the success of this program. That's certainly my opinion. Egan, you know, Tanium is interesting because Tanium comes out of the Petri dish, I think around 07. sort of shoots out of a cannon right about the same time that CDM was sort of being developed. So this technology was sort of on the same trajectory, if you will, came together very nicely, and certainly is a big part of what's making the CDM capability work. What's going on over at Tanium in regards to across the programmatic spectrum these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. Kevin nailed it when he brought up the data quality management piece of this, and that really, if you get down to brass tacks, that's why we exist today. We're a kind of generational step forward in terms of how we gather data. And one of the things that we're finding, we work with, obviously, with a great many customers in the CDM space. And one of the things that we're finding is that there is still a gap in terms of data quality. We have this concept, if I can move data from point A to point B very quickly, then I have good data, it's timely, it's accurate, it's complete. When the reality is you also have to assess the state of that data at point A. How stale is it? How long has it been there? And what really becomes fascinating, and this is kind of part and parcel to the impossible problem that 7 years ago we set out to solve, is as you get into the law of large numbers, all data becomes ephemeral. Things that we don't really consider ephemeral, machine state, machine presence, things like that. At a large enough scale, it becomes this living, breathing organism. And it's interesting to me because that's really what Aware sets out to tackle. It's an incremental step forward, right? I think with Aware, we've taken the beach, but we have to remember there's an entire continent that we also have to take here. But it's good progress, and it brings into account things like operational context of the endpoint, what data exists on the endpoint, where the endpoint is residing at the time of use. The problem is, especially now, as we've seen with this mass transition to distributed workforce, that's all become ephemeral. And so now there's this need for, rather than being able to say, well, 72-hour turnaround should be sufficient, there's this need to be able to look at things in real-time context as they're changing as a living, breathing organism. And so that today, that's sort of the problem that we're trying to help solve, to keep that incremental progress from halting.
Really sort of trying to get up to this light speed 0 day, we'll also say
continuous,
trust
right?
in there, right? And we were all thrilled when, okay, all right, we've identified, or we think we have 100 devices on the network, and then we realized, no, actually we have 1,500 on the network, and now getting to the point where, okay, we know we have 1,500 on the network, we're just simply looking at the quality of the data. I'm going to jump over to Kevin for just a second and ask him, we're talking about Aware, using these terms. Can you just really quickly give a top line, sort of, just for those that may be listening about CDM for maybe the first time or a couple of times they've heard some of these terms, just give them the top line of what those layers are so people understand that.
To get started with CDM, we were, as I mentioned, focused on helping agencies understand what's on the network. So that's the asset management layer. We also wanted to help agencies understand who their users are. That's the identity and access layer. We're also focused on network security management, helping agencies understand what's happening on their network, both on-prem as well as in the cloud. And finally, with data protection management, helping get the right data encryption, data loss prevention capabilities in place for high-value assets to make sure our most critical data is protected. The model for CDM then works where the data flows up from those different sensors and scanners up to the dashboard, both at the agency level, where the data is more detailed, object level, and then we summarize it up to the federal level. And then in the operationalization of CDM, with the rollout of the new dashboard, with the processes for data quality management, we're operationalizing that data, as Egon mentioned, with the Aware algorithm to really help agencies understand what their overall security posture looks like for vulnerability management, patch management, configuration management, et cetera.
Excellent. Excellent top line there, so everyone can, no pun intended, be aware of sort of the multi-layered, if you will, concept there that has gotten us to this point. David, let me throw it over to you at Micro Focus, and let me start with just describe to folks what Micro Focus is, and what journey that you've been on, and sort of how you fit into the ecosystem, and then give us the state of the state.
Sure. Well, thanks, Luke, for that. we're actually one of the largest software companies, pure play software companies worldwide. We have a very deep and wide portfolio, and we've been providing CDM capabilities, since 2013 to federal space. So people are probably more familiar with our brands, which originated with our merger with Hewlett Packard software, which I'm sure everyone recognizes, such as Fortify and ArcSight and our enterprise ICAM offerings in NetIQ. But through those acquisitions within Micro Focus, we've been able to focus and grow our security portfolio. So excited to be here today. And we've been in business about 40 years, which people don't realize. We want to be in business for the next 40 years, Luke, and we're very customer focused.
Very much some marquee brands in the community, but when people hear Micro Focus, I wanted to make sure they understand that there's all these great capabilities underneath of it that people are very familiar with. All right, well, let me roll it over to you, James, and talk about a specific program. There's been a lot of activity going on over at SBA, and I'm sure you've got more than one opportunity to highlight a program that really, CDM, this capability, was able to, address and solve a lot of those needs that you were embarking to implement.
It is tough to nail down a particular CDM program. I think as a whole, that the CDM concept and intentions really helped us this past year. And realistically, this past year for SBA is going to be dominated by, again, CARES Act and response to the COVID-19 crisis. So it's really been a blur. So the circle back to that partnership, that was critical. When we needed some surge support, Kevin Cox and team was there. They helped us out. When we needed to, identify, how do we scale and expand and do X, Y, and Z, they were there to help out. So it allowed us to, in short, LEG went from 5,000 individuals to 20,000 individuals in a span of a month. With that, we did not have to figure out how to reformat or rebuild CDM, at least the cloud-based one. It was just ready to go. It was there. So I really think it was nothing specific for this past year that really made the difference. It's the work that we laid over the past 2-3 years that got us to this point. Speaking of the TIC work, CDM work, surge support, it got us to this point where we were able to respond the way that we needed to without going crazy, basically.
100% really put you in a position to scale, right? I mean, all the migration that you all had done with the into the cloud prior, the TIC work that you had done, some of the prototyping, et cetera, and the fact that you were able to just sort of, turn the dial up and make all that work, and knowing that, you had a lot of organizations from all over probably the world just pounding on those systems. Just super impressive to see that you all were able to sort of answer the message and take it to the highest order. So I applaud everybody over at SBA and over at the CDM program for helping make that happen. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back in a moment. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about CDM. We were talking specifically about various programs that we'd like to highlight. And Egan, I'd like to throw it over to you. Tanium's been right smack in the middle of this program, and certainly globally implementing this capability. So we'd like to give you an opportunity to highlight a program that would be of interest to the listening audience as far as what Tanium is doing and sort of how they're doing it.
Sure. Yeah, and for us, a program loosely equates to customer, right? Because we're a vendor at the end of the day.
Of course.
And so I think and we'll never name a customer by name on something like this, but there's one that stands out to me that is knee deep in the whole process of CDM compliance. I would say they're probably one of the more progressive that we've interacted with. And one of the problems that they hit pretty quickly was that it was a technology issue, but it was a technology issue that translated into staffing. And I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. I believe today there's 40,000 plus SKUs on the CDM APL. There's one of everything out there, and the problem is if you go out and you kind of take that one of everything approach, it's very difficult to staff that. They took an interesting approach because their focus was both consolidation for the purposes of efficiency, but also kind of moving to that next generational place where they have real-time context awareness. We struggle even today, 30 years into this whole IT thing, we struggle to answer very basic questions like, what do I have and what's it doing? And taking a shotgun approach to that can get extremely expensive, especially on that staffing side. And so in their case, we were able to work with them and help them not only consolidate the number of tools that they're using dramatically, so like a 20-to-1 ratio, but also be able to focus the team of folks that they had, so you didn't have to just divide people up and have people reading logs all day and trying to respond to raw data, but actually having a contextual awareness of their enterprise and being able to take actions as things are happening and being aware in real time as to what's going on. And it's been hugely successful for them. I wish I could give more detail, frankly, but I'll let the customer do that someday.
Sure, and we can let our imagination run wild on there, but you're absolutely right. You just cannot throw enough human beings at these issues. You must instrument, you must automate, you must introduce things like ML and AI and really get to the, finding the needle and the stack of needles and be able to roll this stuff up and make good quality, timely decisions. Speaking of which, Gary, let me throw it over to you at Veterans Affairs. The complexity there that you described is daunting, right? And I think about HIPAA as well and all the other things that you are doing in regards to having to protect data, the new systems that you're putting in place there, the new systems that are going on at DoD that you have to interface with, super complex. Give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight that it just sort of shows the power of this capability to solve some of those big problems for you.
Sure. So what I'd like to pull the cord on real quick, though, is the concept of the contextualization, because I got to tell you, I think that would be really apropos for what we've done at the department. I mean, monumental strides in order to provide all these different elements of data and then integrate it into a common platform so it does get contextualized has been one of the predominant focuses of what we've tried to do at the department. Not only do we have the visualization aspect, right, improving the visualization across all these 1.2 million devices. And that's been particularly complicated as a result of the COVID, where we now have this massive remote workforce. So, how can we bring forward that visualization that would be equivalent to what we'd see within the enterprise? But most importantly, how do we reconcile all that information and contextualize it so somebody can take action on an as required basis as they're looking at the integrated monitors within our CSOC? And that's really been one of the predominant focuses that we've looked at. And as I mentioned, now we're almost at 95%, 100% visualization across all these various endpoints through the ForeScout implementations. I mean, we've integrated it with our FireEye, we've integrated it with our QRadar, and we're obviously bringing all this together within Splunk. A couple of other things too that I want to mention is that, you talk about some of the major accomplishments. I'm just going to talk in general about the program itself, but simplistic things like how can we leverage existing tools that we've been able to obtain through CDM that we either had or got through CDM to help us with COVID, for example, or with Mission Act. And, we're using Comply to Connect now, and BigFix is instrumental in allowing us to do that. So, no longer, do we have other scenarios playing out. Hey, before you log on, your device is getting checked. If it needs patches, it immediately gets those patches before you can connect. So it's really been revolutionary in how we're able to apply this because, we need it. We're everywhere. We're geographically all over the place. So we need the tools to work in tandem with one another to realize the outcome.
And be able to do it at scale and yeah, basic things like tool rationalization, et cetera, are really important. David, how about over at Micro Focus? I'm sure you've got a specific program that you'd like to highlight that kind of, sort of brings to bear, a great example of how this capability is being used.
Well, sure. Thanks for that, Luke. I guess, last year we made a lot of progress, as as an industry partner on maturing some of the capabilities within our products. But one program in particular that we worked on was within U.S. Commerce to support all the remote workers that are conducting the Sentinel, in the census for this year. they were leveraging our ICAM capabilities to establish an enterprise ICAM identity management for credentialing of those temporary remote users. And if you think about that use case that we were working with Census, it's based on a zero trust model, which we built into our portfolio, assuming that all those remote workers are fraudulent and need to be credentialed. And we're able to help them, stand up an entire process for that. Now, the census itself had trouble getting started and conducting, as I think everybody's aware of. They're making progress with that. But probably what I'm most proud of is the support program we put in place. They wanted to have a very unique product support model so that we could support a 24/7 model to support those any issues that they may have had with the portfolio and the products. And so the vendor community came together, all the vendors that were helping support them through this to make sure we were available both within our R&D and our product folks. And then a couple of the other programs we benefited from last year was because of that zero trust architecture we built into our core identity management products. It lended itself very well as the workforce shifted during COVID to being remote. So we were able to help with like using your SMS, cell phone, text messaging to do multi-factor authentication, which wasn't a need before, with a lot of the PID credentialing, and helping with the bring your own device requirements, because laptops weren't available for a lot of the remote folks. So those customers that were using our products, in the federal agencies, we were able to put some unique programs together where they could scale and expand at very little cost to meet the needs of the crisis. And probably the last area is really within our Fortify product, which is heavily used, but there's been a big effort across DoD to standardize DevSecOps and to build in software assurance, which I believe is the new attack surface, right? So we're able to use machine learning in Fortify to create an audit assistant and to centralize scans, and then demonstrate how you could leverage that as an enterprise service versus a local excellence within a development team to provide more visibility and metrics on how fast you're innovating from a DevOps perspective, but also how secure are you, and really understand that supply chain that goes into building a product or a custom application to make sure it's secure. So we've made a lot of progress there as well.
Super example. I love that census one. You can imagine there's just thousands and thousands of new folks kind of coming onto the network, and sort of, what's on the network, but also who's on the network, really key there. So identity management always been highlighted as a real key aspect of, making sure that these environments are secure and stay secure. Kevin, I'm going to throw it up to you. Give us an example of a specific program that you feel like, maybe a specific piece of that, right? There's layers that you described there that's really ringing the bell these days, and then you're gaining a lot of capability out of it.
I think I'll just use the two examples of VA here with Gary and in Small Business Administration with James, because we're doing some really good things with them, and I think really they're showing the promise of the whole CDM program, the initiatives we set out for. So starting with the Veterans Administration, as you mentioned, Luke, the organization has so many stakeholders, and it's just so large in terms of its mission scope and the importance of that mission, that we really wanted to work with Gary and the team to make sure that they could get the full visibility so that they understood everything that was connected to their network. They could get in front of the adversary, in front of the threat, in order to protect the data of our veterans. And that's been a real success for us. Because when we started out, it's a huge undertaking, as you're aware, and just to be able to help Veterans Administration get up to the 95% level, on the track to get to 100% in terms of full visibility in real and near real time is a huge accomplishment. And it just really lays the foundation for them to do even more to once again get in front of that threat. Now, with the work we've been doing with James and his team over at Small Business Administration, with the move that they've made to the cloud, they've really been a great partner to work with to help formulate how we move CDM into the cloud, how we make CDM work in the cloud. Because the data, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, is just as important, and we need to make sure that the agency has the visibility, they know how it's protected, they know who has access to that data. And so the Small Business Administration has been a great partner in helping us really chart out the right approaches for the cloud, the ability to partner with the cloud service providers so that we could get James and his team and his leadership the visibility they needed of that data. We have many other examples in terms of all the disparate missions throughout the federal government, but I think really getting these foundational pieces in place has been significant to allowing the agencies to do everything else that they needed to do to get in front of the threat that we're seeing on a daily basis.
Right, and there's a lot of super important missions out there, and those two are really important. And I think about sort of that citizen experience, right? Being able to take this capability and enable that veteran, right? Enable that small business owner to get the goods and services that they're looking for, and to be able to be confident about it and be secure about it, I think is super important. So hats off to all of you for all the great work that's being done there. Jim, I'm going to throw it over to you. Fortinet, again, right in the middle of a lot of these different capabilities, and give us an example of a program that you've been running at one of these agencies, whether it's these or one of the others, or you know, you guys are a global company, right? You're right in the middle of the ecosystem. You built a lot of it that you'd like to highlight in regards to CDM and some of those capabilities.
So Luke, as you said, Fortinet is one of the world's largest cybersecurity companies. We've got a really, really broad portfolio, and that's allowed us to be instrumental in areas such as the convergence of security and networking, to focus on things like security-driven networking. And I'm going to give you two quick examples of how we've been able to work on that for federal partners. One is for a DoD program with over 1,000 domestic sites. We helped that program migrate from a classic wired network to a software-defined one, specifically an SD-WAN topology. The solution brought the productivity and cost benefits and better security that you would associate with SD-WAN, and it also met the core CDM criteria in terms of assets, accounts, and events. A brand new one that we just finalized now is working with the law enforcement component of a major federal agency that has hundreds of locations. Because of their law enforcement mission, they need to be on the dark web. They need to be doing analytics and data collection without compromising their core federal network. They're working in a mobile environment, and the proof of concept we just finalized that's led to an agency-wide contract succeeded in meeting their productivity goals, security, things like chain of custody issues for law enforcement, and again, they're about to take that nationwide. And in the proof of concept, they actually showed that the solution, this convergence of security and networking, hit the core CDM questions. They knew what was on the network, they knew who was on the network, they knew what was happening. And then again, because of law enforcement and this involvement on the dark side, they also knew how the core data was being protected.
And having spent a little bit of time with the federal law enforcement community in my federal career, you know, that remote capability is so important for them to be able to have that capability at their hands when they're out in the field, just super important. And so I thank you and all the folks over there for enabling that. That's been a long-standing requirement that they've had. We're going to roll it over into priorities and talk about your top priority is what I'm going to ask all of you for CDM, let's say over the next 6 months. And Dave, I'm going to start with you at Micro Focus. You know, what is your priority? What's the priority they're giving you? However you want to put that in regards, number one, for 6 months to continue to enable this CDM journey for the ecosystem.
Sure, we've been working very hard to make sure that our products can be consumable easily consumable within federal agencies and interoperable with other vendors. And one of the things we realized is the function for risk management, specifically with things like user behavioral analytics and in credentialing, and also when you're looking at traffic and data in your SIM, is a common function. But yet there are usually multiple vendors that have a risk engine. So what we did is we worked very hard to break out the risk engine within our user behavior analytics product. And we're offering that now as a separate, consumable service offering. And my focus for the next 6 months is going to be continue to build out offerings for other enterprise ICAM type functional capability areas like credentialing and privileged access management to be available as consumable services to complement that risk service that we're
Make it
offering.
easy, plug and play, it sounds like, on consuming those good services and capabilities. James, I'm going to throw it over to you at SBA. Number one priority for you in regards to your CDM sort of security journey?
Certainly. Number one priority is to move to the Elastic dashboard. And the benefits I hope to reap from that, it's a more flexible and dynamic environment as compared to the current state solution. I know I may have mentioned before in other forums, but SBA actually does run 2 different CDM programs. The legacy CDM, which is the one that we all know and love, and then the one we built last year in partnership with DHS, built 100% in the cloud. So as we move to Elastic Cloud, I like to pare down on both of those 2 separate CDM programs so that we have a single dashboard that collects all of our data, regardless of where it comes from, on-prem to cloud, SaaS, PaaS, etc. And with that, start seeing some of the cost savings, be that from some work we get from automation, from just reducing tool spend, etc. So number one priority, Elastic platform.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing that fully realized. Egan, Tanium, number one priority for you all going forward?
Yeah, we're really trying to redefine the way that people think and talk about risk, because what we've seen historically is that there has been a very narrow view, and CDM is kind of opening that up a bit. We still tend to be focused as an industry on vulnerability-based risk management. We're trying to open the aperture on that pretty dramatically and get people to start talking about risk at we'll call it a more corporate level, the way the board would look at risk, and considering what really goes into that, and the level of contextual awareness and the speed to track the changes in context of anything in your enterprise, anything in the IT ecosystem, and being able to take that into account in real time to truly understand what your risk profile looks like from 1 second to the next, rather than treating risk as something that you assess on a periodic basis, even if that periodicity is daily or every 72 hours. That's simply not sufficient in the modern IT space.
So really taking this technology and allowing the business leaders to make good, informed, real-time risk-based decisions. I love it. Sounds awesome. Well, we're going to take a short break and we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about CDMs. We were talking specifically about priorities. And I'm going to throw it up to you, Gary, and talk about priorities at Veterans Affairs. Give us your number one top line priority in regards to where we are with the CDM program, what you want to accomplish.
You bet. So I'd say our number one priority is the data quality. Through the integration of all these various tools across the integrated geographically dispersed environment of the VA, it's complicated. And so there's been monumental efforts to try and ensure that as we begin to bring these tools together and they share information back and forth, that we can rely upon that data for decision making. And so again, I mentioned we're integrated with FireEye, we're integrated with QRadar. We've done a lot of the FISMA containerization activities so that we can integrate it into the EMAS tool that we brought on board for our authorization processing. And then we're also bringing it forward into our ServiceNow platform as well. So, all of these things begin to integrate, and the most important thing is that can you rely upon the data? So lots of efforts across the board to make sure that can happen. But I think that, and why would we do that? Because I think it dovetails with exactly what Egan was talking about. It's all about risk management and risk decision making, ensuring that the business has the capacity to make the right decisions. Because one thing we've noticed across the board is that there are lots of capabilities that people want to bring to bear to meet the needs of the veteran, specifically within the medical community. And we want to make sure that we can look at those things as it relates to the risks that they present within the environment, and do that in a manner that ensures that we understand what that risk is, and that we do that in a quick time fashion, so that there's not massive delays in bringing forward these new technologies, because the veteran deserves it and they need it.
Fantastic. I love the idea of sort of time to market for, again, as you just mentioned, a very important client, which is our cherished veterans. Jim, let me throw it over to you at Fortinet. Number one priority for you all going forward over the next 6 months.
So look, you've already mentioned time, and I think I would highlight the C part of CDM, continuous. You can't be continuous.
Good catch there, by the way, on the continuous.
Without automation. And we're not only focused on the technical part of saying we see it in terms of diagnostics and response, but the higher level automation, the ability to have playbooks to say, work with your federal partner to say, if we see X occurring, policy-driven automation will say we're going to respond in Y or Z fashion. We are also trying to help build out this ecosystem. I said there's a half a dozen big platforms that really provide the underpinning, the ability to integrate and orchestrate all of this. We've got over 300 vendors in our partner alliance. We recognize the federal government has got a lot of legacy stuff. You want to facilitate the interoperability between those existing deployments. People aren't going to do rip and replace. And then finally, working with each federal partner to say, you all have different legacy deployments. So how can we help you migrate, especially in the areas of cloud, mobility, and remote, and that software-defined networking that I described in my 2 success stories.
Continuous being the key word. Gonna throw out one lesson learned question, and I'm gonna do it with Kevin, and then we're gonna start from the back of the batting order and work our way back up for a wrap up. But Kevin, you run this program. Top lesson learned since you've been running this program, plus or minus?
The top lesson learned, really from an acquisition standpoint, we needed to take into account the complexity we see across the federal government in terms of the various missions, the legacy systems in place, the various technologies used throughout the federal government, and create an acquisition approach that could account for that. As mentioned, we recognize that a rip and replace approach wouldn't work. Many of these agencies had solutions that worked already. We needed the flexibility to interact with systems already in place, the flexibility to fill in gaps where needed, to pull all of that data together and really bring value, working with our partners in the industry, bring value to the agencies in terms of getting that cybersecurity visibility. So the key for me from a lessons learned standpoint and what we've been able to deliver with our defend task orders is that flexibility.
Right. I think, you know, being the continuous, in order to be continuous, you must be flexible. And you guys have, again, your organization has done a brilliant job of doing that. So we thank you for that. All right. We're going to wrap it up with this last question. And this one's about painting a picture of the future, right? What does it look like around the corner, over the horizon? Give us some insight as to, you know, sort of what's cooking, if you will, in the prospective organizations and agencies. David, let's start with you at Micro Focus.
Sure. Probably one of the areas that I see advancing is the ability to encrypt data in use. You know, we've had a lot of hard policies and laws about encryption in transit, as well as, you know, encryption at rest for data. But the technologies, you know, one of which we offer within our Voltage product is to encrypt data in use that allows you to perform analytics and other, you know, for your call center or your CRM tools and your ERP tools, where you can protect a lot of that privacy data and PII data within your applications in use. So if they are, you know, breached, a lot of the information is still protected because it's in an encrypted but usable, you know, format. So we've had some success, especially in the healthcare agencies, with rolling that out. And it turns out they really like the ability they can generate test data. So they're not using their production data to do testing. And I think it's the whole management of that data and the data lifecycle is going to be the future, and, you know, for protecting, you know, a lot of the data that CDM is meant to defend.
Fantastic. I know there's a lot of folks that are really comforted to hear that, right? If you can neuter that data and God forbid somebody gets a hold of it, not an issue, right? Fantastic concept. Egan, how about Tanium? I know you all have a lot of cool stuff going on in that Petri dish. Can you give us some insight?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to address is we sort of have this disease as humans that we tend to deify data, and the more that we can collect and consolidate in one place, the more we do that. What we're trying to really get across and help customers with is this understanding of true real-timeness, right? Not I can move this data and consolidate it here and then contextualize it after the fact, but understanding that context comes from the state that the endpoint was in at the moment that data was collected, and every second that ticks by, that data is becoming stale and therefore less accurate. And so what we're trying to help people do is get that true real-time understanding of their ecosystem, so that when, if you have an endpoint that downloads PII data or disconnects from the VPN or anything that happens on that endpoint, that should be reflected in real time in terms of the risk portfolio or risk profile rather of that endpoint. And therefore on the enterprise as a whole. And that's especially true now that we're in a state where the vast majority of the workforce is distributed. But that's a really difficult thing to do. The tendency again is let's collect data, analyze it, and try to contextualize it after the fact. And we're trying to bring that true real-time context awareness where we allow people to see the state of the endpoint as it exists right now, and 1 second from now, and 2 seconds from now, and so on. And that's a difficult problem to solve, but that literally is why we exist as a company. So.
Yeah, that flash to bang needs to get to close to zero as possible. And, let's face it, stale data, stale information means stale decision making, right? And so I applaud you all for recognizing that and being able to get that capability in the hands of the decision makers to make good risk-based decisions. Jim, how about over at Fortinet? I know you all are always cooking up new capabilities over there. Give us some insight as to what we can expect over the next, year or two.
So Luke, I'd build on the comments of both Egon and Dave. It's all about the data. And in the CDM context, it's about characterizing it in real time, being able to say, I know normal, I know abnormal, and I can mitigate the potential consequences from abnormal. And as I've said, these platforms that exist out there in the cybersecurity ecosystem are doing a pretty good job of being able to do that in real time. Just pick an ecosystem and try to stay within that ecosystem. The problem for federal agencies is you have a lot of cases where you don't want either the data or even telemetry about the data to go to somebody's off-premise data center. So what excites me is we're getting to the ability with this AI-driven automation to give that kind of capability to agencies to be able to deploy in-house. It drives me crazy, both as a taxpayer and a former federal executive, to hear agencies talking about building the AI to do threat analytics in-house. I go, look, the private sector has spent over 10 years learning to do that, leverage what we're doing. We're getting to the point where we can give you something we call a virtual security analyst that you can deploy in the environment. It reports into your SOC. It starts 99% plus accurate and gets better. You own it. It can do augmentation, threat discovery, and response. Take advantage of what the private sector's done. The final part I would say is we're getting to the point now, I think, in the industry of being able to offer CDM as a service. We have been talking to big agencies on this program. They have large, sophisticated capability. We know there's a lot of small agencies that, just as they had to consume TIC as a service through MTIPs, are frankly going to look for somebody to do the same thing on CDM. And I know there are some systems integrators out there in the ecosystem that are now starting to offer CDM as a service.
Well, I think you may be teeing up Mr. Cox for his closing comments, but I'll hold and keep my powder dry on that one. But you're raising some very good points, and very interesting to hear about some of those concepts that are going to be implemented. Well, speaking of a federal executive official, Gary, what can, 2 years from now, veterans got a lot of capability. You all are starting to implement telemedicine. Blue Button, I guess, is a few years old. What can a veteran expect, in the next couple of years? What were you guys cooking up over there to take that experience to yet the next level?
Well, I think that's it's interesting that you mentioned that with the telehealth, because that has really been one of the predominant motivators behind what's been happening within VHA. And I just want to put this in perspective too. We also have VBA, NCA, and they are massive. The benefit.
What are VBA and MCA for those that may not know?
Veterans Benefits Administration, National Cemetery Administration. So, I mean, it's again, soup to nuts kind of capability set to meet the needs of the veteran. But what I would say is that all part of that and essential to that is, and these were some of the themes that were mentioned, what we're looking at internally within the VA is how can we use behavioral analytics to understand the behaviors across the IoT, IOMT environment, and then be able to reconcile that information to determine, is there a threat, is there an issue, is there a risk, and then put this in context within what's happening within all the infrastructure that we have that constitutes this apparatus of ISCM capabilities that we're using to help assess our environment. And this is particularly true as we move out on the EHR initiative with DoD. We've got to understand what is happening within the environment and be able to report it and respond to it accordingly. And I think that that's really one of the major focus areas for the department. So from the veterans' perspective, they can continue to rely upon the fact that the VA is protecting their data in as optimum way as is humanly possible with as many tools and capabilities as we can bring to bear to do precisely that. And we're continuing to push the envelope to the next level through the use of innovative capabilities and behavioral analytics.
And I would just say, you make a good point. I want to call out not just the veterans, but certainly their families that get involved in these benefits. And of course, the burial and burial services. And I would just point out, if you've never been to a military burial service in a veterans facility, is one of the most solemn and moving experiences you'll ever have. So hats off to all of you. James, how about at SBA? I know there's a lot of activity going on over there. You guys went from 100 miles an hour to 1,000 miles an hour, and probably learned a lot from that as well. What can one expect? What can a small business owner expect over the next year or so as you all continue to improve the goods and services even better than you're doing today?
So one of the big initiatives that was started under the CIO Maria wrote with the respect and approval from the various administrators, is being carried through with our new CIO, Keith Bluestein. It's improving the small business experience, the customer experience when they interact with SBA. Right. So that's the really big drive, big initiative that is ongoing throughout the agency. From a security perspective, it's all about us getting to automation. I love a good football analogy. So what makes a cornerback great? The ability to read, react, stay on the hip pocket of a receiver, so that you can knock down that ball. Now imagine that ball is a risk. It needs to become automatic in your mind to say, hey, the ball's in the air, I need to go swat it down or intercept it. That's where automation comes into play. Automation to me is that good cornerback. That's the big push that we need to do, is leverage CDM to get to really solid automation to not only have beautiful dashboards, but respond to threats in near real time.
And ultimately improve that customer experience. I love the fact that you're highlighting that. I really do appreciate everything you're doing over there. Kevin, you've laid out a whole bunch of activities over there. What's the next chapter to this journey? What can we expect from the CDM program over the next year or 2 years?
So one of the things I want to just close and highlight is a key value of the CDM program is partnership. Everything that we've done, everything that we're going to do in the future is going to be in partnership with our agency partners, as well as with our industry partners, the folks here on this session, on this panel, as well as our many other partners throughout the federal agencies and within industry. In working with all these partners, our key, as I mentioned throughout, is in FY21 to really achieve the promise of CDM as we originally set out. We want to get the new dashboard in place that is scalable, that is high performance, that is flexible, that has better visualization capabilities to help the agencies, as Jim had mentioned, with it's been mentioned many a time, with risk management, getting in front of the risk, understanding the risk. Associated with getting that new dashboard in place, we also want to ensure that the data quality coming up from the sensors and the scanners is there. It's being reported in a timely fashion. And then also in 21, operationalizing that data. Again, showing the promise of CDM, helping the agencies understand what their security posture is, which is a key component of risk, so that they can continue to reduce their attack surface, continue to improve their overall cybersecurity posture, so that at the end of the day, we can get in front of the threat, get in front of the adversary, and keep them away from our most critical data, our most critical mission areas.
Fantastic, and I really appreciate the wrap up there. Super exciting to see that, and I think we're all looking forward to realizing this dream that you've just laid out for us in 2021. Well, that's going to wrap it up for us, and I want to really thank all of the guests on today's show for taking the time from their busy schedules to join us for this program. I'd also like to thank the sponsors for supporting us on the show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience that tune in every month. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.